It's a disease in it's
Is he okay?
Jeannie, you want a paper?
I got one.
Right there.
His brains are leaking out.
Here you go.
I heard that, but you know something? I've been afraid of that.
Dottie.
Dot.
Yeah, we're gonna go around the tables and introduce each other to each other. That's
Can
what
you
we're
bring
doing.
me a cup of coffee? Just don't.
Or I can get up.
We got about 5 minutes, or 4 minutes or so, so we're gonna wait, and then when we get started, we'll,
Want anything you know?
oh, look at this,
Can I say
fantastic.
something, if anybody cares?
Yeah,
It does my heart so good to see everybody here for this.
Yes, it's wonderful.
You know what, Phil, I'm gonna move back a bit.
There's coffee.
I was
Sure.
gonna say something, I gotta go. I'm gonna be monitoring the live stream feeds, so in case somebody writes in, and I'll just yell at them there.
okay.
You may need
No,
to
we could
repeat
make
it.
this bigger by taking the center table out.
Yeah, well, next time we will, it gets, yeah, we will.
He needs to stay where he is though for the for the cameras for tonight.
I don't want to hide.
I'm very careful the whole time, that's why nobody wants to sit there.
Now you know why everybody's this way.
Yeah.
I always wanted to hide.
You can't scoot any further down, or we'd scoot down for you.
We've got a couple more people.
Lori's getting you one. Well, somebody's gonna wait on you, if you'll just give us a minute, okay?
There's the man.
No, that is Perry. We just had that discussion
Now,
on
did
the
you guys
way
get
from
one of
one
these?
corner to the next corner.
I can share.
Seriously, I just said.
And we got a
cars
couple
were just
more up here.
screaming, and I said,
Jim.
just.
Jim, you need one?
Somebody want,
He said, you know that's my long suit. Yeah, no patience.
Come on, we got a couple more here.
Jim, you want to sit up here?
Come on, Jim, you can behave.
Sit by the teacher. And you know what?
Are we going like week 1?
Yeah, we're not gonna use the book.
You told me we were.
You just
Well,
didn't
we're
want to listen to
study
me.
book.
You can't do it.
That book is really designed for during the week, personal additional study,
Okay.
okay? That's what it's designed for. And, you know, I didn't want to have everybody have to
Buy one?
buy one, so. Hey, big guy.
you recommend that book for everybody to buy if they want to?
You can buy it if you want to, you get it in seedbed, but I don't, you don't have to have it not to do this, that's for certain. That's for additional devotionals during the week, is really what it's set up for. And the stuff that is being handed out is also in the back of that book, but I'm copying that and giving it all to you. And I have been doing this for a while now. I think we're pretty close to wanting to get underway, so what I would like to do before we get going is, let's run around the table, and everybody can introduce yourself, say a quick word about who you are, and if you'd like, why you're here. So,
Oh, you going this way?
yeah.
My name is Jim Sipple. I don't know why I'm here, I would just live here. Lived in Winter Haven for almost 64 years, so,
Wow. You've seen the changes, huh?
oh, you bet.
Okay.
Okay, my name is Sue Hoffner, and the reason I'm here is I don't know anything about the Bible, so
Hey,
that's the reason I'm here.
It's a good book.
It's a good book.
It's a good book.
so
If you can read it and understand it.
it's a world bestseller.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, Jeannie Hansen, we've been here 40-some years,
42.
and I'm the unlucky person married to Perry.
Or lucky. Somebody had to.
And I was just,
We're proud you stood up and took the challenge.
challenge.
I have a sheet of paper up here for those of you who need marriage counseling. I've done that before.
62 years.
I
62
don't,
years.
I don't hate it.
You know, it's too late.
Took one for the team.
Carol Allen, Floridian. Jim might be too, I'm not sure.
No, not really.
Let's see. We originally came to Winter Haven in January 1965, and we were here about 26 months, and Don was transferred away. We came back 4 years later in 1970. I've been here ever since, so I don't know how many years that is, I never added it up. It's a lot. I'm here to learn.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Heather Tony. I'm originally from Jamaica, spent most of my life in New York. I ended up here because of him.
It's all his fault.
Is that a good thing or bad thing?
Women
Figured out
vicious
one
tonight.
out.
It won't take her long.
No, I believe that knowledge is power.
Amen. You're right. You are right.
Absolutely.
Well, let him speak for himself now.
Okay.
My name is Chris Tony. Been in Winter Haven since 5 years, okay? And I'm here because I had to drive the States.
I'm getting the broad picture.
We need that marriage card.
Well, after hearing both of you, it may be double the price.
Hi, I'm Donna Whistler. I'm originally from Kentucky. I live right now in Indiana. I still consider myself a Kentuckian. And I'm here because it's Wednesday night, and well, when you were raised as a Southern Baptist, you went to church on Wednesday night.
There you go. There you go. That's right. That's right.
That is so true.
Now, Perry has not really told us what you did to him to get his head that way.
Well, I can't tell you.
Okay. Perry?
My name is Perry Hanson, and she is a slow learner. 63 years she's been married.
Oh, I thought it was just.
62. Anyway, I'm here because I wanted to be.
There you go. There you go.
What did you do to your head, honey?
I had something removed. A squamous cell. It's called a squamous cell. It only took 13 stitches. You want to see it?
No.
Perry, I would only say one thing. When you're asked what happens to your head, you never say, I had something removed.
It's a brain leak.
There you go.
Frontal lobotomy. isn't it?
That's right. I think that's maybe what it is. Yeah. You?
Well, I thought you were, That's fine. I'm Lois Alderfer, originally from Indiana, been down here for 30 years. And I'm here because we used Sandy Richter in Sunday school, and she is excellent, and I could use a lot more.
Very
And
good.
I happen to be sister-in-law to these two.
I didn't think she'd admit to that.
And we did have marriage counseling.
That's right.
Before we got married.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm Pat Wilder. I've been in Polk County since 1968. Both my children were born in Lake Lawn. And we don't need marriage counseling. We've only been married 25 years.
Now, he didn't say you didn't need it.
He hasn't spoken yet.
Okay.
I'm Willis Wilder, and I don't hear very well, so if you speak to me, don't think I'm ignoring you. It's just that I don't hear very well. And I've been here since '91. I'm also a native Kentuckian. And Jim, where are you from in Kentucky?
Fairdale.
Fairdale? Okay. I'm from Florida. Jim's
I was
from
born in
Fort
Louisville.
Lee. That's it.
Good. Okay.
I'm Dottie Huven, married to Jim. We don't need marriage counseling, we've only been married almost 54 years.
Too late for you two.
Yeah, too late for us. Gotta put up with it. We're originally from Wisconsin, and we're still snowbirding. So we go out for 4 months.
We're in Wisconsin.
We were born and raised in Green Bay, We live in the valley now, it's where we go up to.
Got much snow up there?
Right now they go about 9 inches.
But they had more.
They had more. It's melting.
Oh, and you're here, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, well, I'm going away next week up to babysit our first 3 grandbabies, so it'll be cold. Sure.
And I'm Jim Cuban, and she said just about all of it. from
Except
Green
while we're
Bay.
here.
Oh, why we're here? We need the help.
Okay.
I'm Dorothy Hoffner, and I've been here since 1986. Born in Missouri, worked for 30-some years in Des Moines, Iowa. When we retired, we sold our house and everything we owned, except we had a boat and a car. And what else did we?
Motorhome.
Motorhome. And then after I came to the church over here, Dr.
Phil, yes.
And I always said to Dr. Phil, I'd love to have been in your congregation. And now I have the chance.
Thank you.
And I'm Sue Granger, and I'm here because I just love Sandy Rifkin. She is just a dynamite. You are all in for such a treat if you have not heard her. She's so dynamic. And we actually have done this once, but I'm ready to do it again because she's got so much info there. So. And I grew up in Indiana.
Well, we're glad you decided to come home.
Oh, it's so good to be home. Oh my gosh. Sleep in my bed, warmer from my coffee cup.
For all of you that don't really know, December 26th, she climbs in a car with my daughter and my son-in-law and granddaughter and heads up to Mebane, North Carolina, because our daughter was going to have surgery in a couple, 3 days. She was there for the balance of December, all of January, and all of February. She got back here February 28th.
Wow. And your daughter?
She's doing better. She's doing much better. She's able to, she's weight bearing now, and that's incredible, because it was a foot surgery, extensive rebuilding of her foot.
And he was so grouchy while you were gone.
Everybody gets
You have to tell her, didn't you know?
Hard to stay in a room with him.
This is such a kind little group.
I know. I thought this was a Bible study, but.
I didn't tell you this was group therapy. And Ron, what do you want to say about yourself?
My name is Ron Williams. I am the worship director for Living Rock, and very happy to be here. Originally from Indiana, like so many of you guys. From Kokomo, went to Taylor University my freshman year, and then moved to Florida and got stuck. But happily married to the other worship director here for the church, Chris, and she's online. And so.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Yeah, Bryce, say hi to Chris. Hey. She will be participating as hopefully others are. And just so you know, I'm going to be monitoring our Facebook and YouTube feed. So when it comes to discussion time, if there's any questions or comments, I'll shout those out to you.
Sounds good. And hidden behind the other monitor?
Oh. Hi, I'm Lori Harner, and I don't know what I am right now.
You're busy.
I'm the church finance, administrative, something or other. But I am from Florida, born and raised. I have Matthew is my son who does head here, and my husband is the chairman of the U committee, and he was the chair of the transitional committee that helped start the church. So, yeah. So.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I can't tell you how happy I am to see all of you here tonight. It just is. Let's start with a word of prayer, shall we? Father, it is so good to be here in your house with these people. Lord, you have just blessed us with the number that are here, and you are going to bless each and every one of us, I know, as we learn more and more about you in the history of your people. Bless us now. In your Son's name we ask. Amen. Before we start looking at the video, I've got a couple questions for you. I want you to think real soon, right now, you're in your bedroom. No, I'm not going there. Watch that. And you have just opened your closet door. Well, how would we find it? Is it neat? Is it orderly? Is it somewhat organized?
Somewhat organized.
Would you rather not talk about it?
Yep.
Pretty much.
Frankly, I'm proud of my closet. It's really well organized.
Well organized.
My closet is also,
Well organized.
yes.
Wait a minute, you're about ready to say that that means that somebody else's
I'm
isn't?
not, no, I'm just speaking for me.
Okay.
It's even color coded.
Color-coded closet.
Some people know too much about you.
Yes.
Okay, so we're trying to get to know each other a little bit better more. A little bit better more. Now, there's good English.
Much more better.
Much more better.
Yeah, and I speak for a living.
I forgot to say that's my daughter's name.
Okay, all right. Can you describe your family or the neighborhood you grew up in, the culture that you came out of? What did you like about it?
It was fun. You could go outside and have fun with your friends.
The kids
Without
played
having to
together.
have,
Yep.
yeah, you played together and you rode bicycles and you played in the dirt and
And you felt safe,
very much safe,
very, very safe.
very safe.
Anybody else want to add
Never
anything?
really
to that?
had a thought, think about being safe, it was just there.
For several years, Sue and I were together in pastoring the church on the campus of Ball State University. And I got to know an urban planner very, very well while we were there. And he pointed out something that I had never realized. He said, you know, when the houses had porches on them, and the families would sit out on the front porch in the evening because we didn't all have air conditioning, and the kids would do exactly what you're saying. They run up and down the streets. Neighborhoods and life was not only simpler, but it was more peaceful, and it had a lot more about being together. And when we went to air conditioning, got rid of the front porches, and we started putting ourselves all locked up inside, we don't have as much chance to know one another. So, have you ever been on a trip to another culture? Where have you been?
Oh, gosh, I've been to Morocco, France, South America, Galapagos Islands, Mexico, Jamaica.
So, were they all like us?
No. They were all different.
Yeah, how about that? How about somebody else?
Dubai.
Dubai. Very good.
It was wonderful. Actually, yeah, because the perception that everyone has about the Arabs when we got there was totally different.
Yep.
I don't know if because we were just visitors, but they were very accommodative and very well mannered. The place is clean. The airport is silent. There's
Silent?
Yeah.
No announcement.
There's no announcement.
Wow.
And it was just so different. I would go back. It's a real rich place, but I mean, like you said, a lot of people think of going to Dubai as unsafe and everything. It's totally the opposite.
She got scared when she flew Iraq, though.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, but it was an
It was
experience. And when we had to go, you had to cover up to go in the mosque, you know, so it was a real, total different experience.
You went to Iraq?
No, what happened is that we were in the plane because it was 13 hours going straight and 16 hours coming back. So we're in the plane and he was looking at the map and he was like, oh, we're
I
gonna
looked
fly.
at the radar.
He was looking at the radar, so he's like, we're gonna fly over Iraq. I was like, oh my God, if they're gonna shoot the plane down. I was like, oh Lord. But
you know,
it was good.
We went to Paris, Thanksgiving, this past Thanksgiving. And they're the opposite of Iraq. I mean, Dubai. I had been to Europe many times, but Paris, they're so rude and
Yeah.
unfriendly.
And it's
Then
dirty.
we went to France, and it was just the opposite.
Yep.
Plus, Paris, you know, everybody speak, you know, French, and when you ask them something, like I say, they're so rude. And even the tour bus driver said that the mayor doesn't like visitors. And then it's all Americans on this bus, and they're talking about Harry, you know. And it wasn't in a negative way in front of all these, it was like 48 people in our group. And they're talking negative about Harry in front of all these Americans. So, but Dubai, we were walking down the street midnight going, it's so clean, so friendly. France, clean, friendly. And then Jamaica, you know, beautiful country, but they all trying to take advantage of your money.
Okay.
We got married in Jamaica.
Is it valid?
Is
it valid here?
Others?
I went to the Netherlands.
Netherlands, yeah.
And they're very, very friendly. I mean, the problem with us is we would stand in the corner waiting for our ride to pick us up. And if you stood too close to the curb, all the traffic stopped because they're waiting for you to cross the street. So if you don't walk back toward the building, the traffic just sits there and it won't move. So you have to, I mean, and the waiters and the wait staff were just outstandingly wonderful. Very, very respectable and just very nice treatment.
Another, as you said there, another interesting thing in Dubai is when you got to the airport, they took your eyes, and then they told us you couldn't jaywalk. Because if you cross the street without the light changing, it picks up your eyes. And so when you go to the airport, they will fine you or lock you up or whatever.
Oh my
Give you a
gosh.
ticket. Yeah.
Wow.
So you could not jaywalk.
How about that?
Wow.
How about that? Goodness gracious.
Wow.
You know, when I was in college, first during my bachelor's degree, I would admit that I had some very difficult times with people out of the Indian culture, not U.S. India, India. And it wasn't until several years later when I married into her family. That was an experience. But her brother had done a period of time in India. And then I got introduced to an evangelist who was from India. And all of a sudden, I started to come to grips with my own cultural biases and how my preconceived notions were wrong, totally and completely wrong. And that really got driven home to us when we spent 5 weeks in India, and the things that I learned. But we are culturally conditioned. You know, what's right about the world is what's right in our culture. What's wrong in the world is what's wrong in somebody else's culture. Now, what do you think? Why do we as Christians struggle so much with the study of the Old Testament?
It's hard to
Different
understand.
culture.
Culturally different. Substantially culturally different.
It has to be interpreted for us.
Yeah? You have to learn a whole new culture, or you're never really going to understand the Old Testament. And that's what we're about here. With this 12-week survey, which is all it is a survey of the Old Testament. You're not going to find a lot of in-depth, but you're going to find a lot of geographic and historical knowledge, and that's going to affect how you attack the Old Testament after this. But you're going to find that when you do that, that some things start to come to light. And I am reminded about my Old Testament prof in seminary, who was a French individual who during World War II swam the canals with bombs on his back to fight the Germans. And his best friend at the seminary was the New Testament prof, who was a German. And there was two people learning about other cultures and finding how to like each other. I have a hunch you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of that in the next few weeks. Ron, why don't you bring up the first session?
All right, here we go.
It's going to be on that one too.
We as Christians want to understand our Bibles, don't we? This is our number one goal. We want to understand redemptive history. We want to catch a glimpse of what this book meant to the original authors and the original audience. We desperately want to understand it and claim this saga for our own. But we as Christians, when we attempt to study our Old Testaments, we struggle, don't we? We struggle, and we struggle for lots of reasons. As a Christian educator, I've distilled this down to 3 reasons. Over my experience with youth groups and adults and seminarians and doctoral students, you name it, and the 3 issues are always the same. The first one, and the one that breaks my heart, is that somewhere along the way, someone has taught the church that the Old Testament isn't their story. That they can launch into the New Testament with Matthew chapter 1, and everything that comes before is somewhere between ancient history and an unfortunate preface to the part of the Bible that really counts. Well, my goal in this series is to break that. I'm going to unravel that myth because it is not true. According to Galatians chapter 4, you are the children of Abraham, and this is your story. And I will not be done with you until you read the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you cry over your people, because they are your people. So this is issue number 1. Issue number 2 is something I call the Great Barrier. And I deal with this in my classes all the time. The Great Barrier is the fact that this book happened long, long ago and far, far away. The geography is different, the dates are truly ancient, and perhaps the thing that separates us the most, our cultures are profoundly different. In this study, our goal is going to be to get past what I think is the most significant barrier in the Great Barrier, and that's the issue of culture. Darrell Whiteman said once, "It is hardly a fish who will discover water. It is hardly a person who will discover their own culture." In fact, it's not until somebody drops you into someone else's culture on a missions trip, or if your business takes you there, that all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, people don't eat what I eat. People don't speak the way I speak. Or if you happen to be like me, a Yankee who got dropped in Jackson, Mississippi for 4 years, all of a sudden you find out that the rules of engagement are a little different as well. So we're going to work on the Great Barrier today. The third thing, and the thing I speak of a great deal in our introduction and throughout the course, is the issue of the dysfunctional closet. You see, for most folks, they've spent their entire lives acquiring all sorts of details about the people, places, locations, and events of the Old Testament, but they're all jumbled up into one big mess, like a really messy closet. Have you ever had one of those? Maybe you're a really together person and it's not a messy closet. Maybe it's just a messy junk drawer or a toolbox or a kid's toy chest. Any of those things where you reach in to grab, the kid's xylophone, because that's what they want to play with today, and the entire Roy Ranger horse and cowboy collection comes out with it. Or you go to your closet to try to find that thing you know you bought 3 summers ago, and you look through the shelves and you look through the drawers and you can't find it anywhere because it's a big mess. Well, this is how I think most Christians' knowledge of the Old Testament works. They've got all this data, a lifetime of acquisitions, but it's all in a jumbled up mess. So what's my job over the course of this series? I'm going to be your closet organizer. I'm going to pull out all that stuff you've already memorized and learned, and I'm going to lay it on the floor and set it in order. I'm going to give you some new rods and hangers and shelves and hooks. We're going to get that self-organized, and we're going to make it work. So this session, we're going to circle back to the first issue, the issue of the Great Barrier, and specifically culture. As Darrell Whiteman has said, it's hardly a fish who would discover water. We are very unconscious of our own culture. We don't get our minds around it. And it's not until we're exposed to someone else's that we realize that we need to be doing some work on a cross-cultural experience. I'm going to argue to you that your foray into the Old Testament is kind of like a missions trip. It is a foray into somebody else's culture. Now, we as humans, we tend to be ethnocentric. There's a 75-cent word. And what it means is that we assume that all other cultures are just like our own. This is not just Western, it's not just American, it's not just colonial, this is human. We assume that everybody else does everything like we do. That's what ethnocentrism is. My job, get you past that, back into the Old Testament world, because my goal for you is that the Old Testament characters will become real people who lived in real places and experienced real faith. And the only way that's going to happen is if I get you past your ethnocentrism. There's another issue in the mix, a phrase I actually made up, something called canonizing culture. I made this up. You're not going to find it in a dictionary. And this is the additional step. When not only are we ethnocentric, we assume that everyone else is just like us, but then we go that additional step and assume that our culture is somehow superior to everyone else's. And then we start crossing the line into sin. Now, we do not want to go about canonizing our own culture. We need to recognize that our culture is a mixed bag. It's got some good stuff, some bad stuff, some really bad stuff. And we've got to recognize that other people's cultures are the same. And ultimately, the gospel critiques everyone's culture. So we're not going to go about the practice of canonizing our culture, or, now here's another step, canonizing the Bible's culture. Yeah, we're not going to do that, because their culture was a mixed bag as well. And on top of that, their culture evolves as we experience it, from the patriarchs, through the monarchy, through the exile, through the New Testament. Which aspect of their culture are you going to canonize if you're going to go after that? No, what we're going to do is we're going to try to understand their culture. We're going to recognize that if we want these stories to come alive to us, we're going to have to get back into their space. So we're going to have a little exercise. You ready? Take a look at the screen. You see this image. And now it's your job to tell me who this image is. And it's not a trick question. Who is this? Jesus, it is indeed. This is a famous image. It's called the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It's been used for generations for devotions, especially among the Catholics. And as you look at this image of Jesus, you tell me, what color is this man's hair?
Light brown.
Yeah, light brown. Some little blonde highlights going on there. What color is his eyes?
Blue.
Blue. And there's even a touch of green, maybe, you know, some alternative genes going on in there. If you were to describe his skin tone,
Caucasian.
definitely Caucasian, even pale Caucasian, and perhaps his build, what would you say?
Muscular.
Okay, we've got one vote for muscular. Do we have any other votes? Regular? All right. Okay, let's take a look at another image. Do you recognize this guy?
Jesus.
Yes, right answer. Okay, and this is kind of the Irish Jesus. This one is Marsani's Gethsemane, and I call him the Irish Jesus because his hair is, yes, and his eyes are aquamarine if you're up close and personal. His skin?
Caucasian.
Yeah, peaches and cream going on here. Now take a look at his hands. I would describe those as piano player hands if I had to. Yeah. Now, we know enough about Jesus, and we know enough about his ethnicity, that we know that Jesus is actually Jewish. Thank you. And as a Jew, what color should his hair be?
Dark.
Yep. And his eyes? Yeah. Dark brown, and his skin?
Olive.
Yeah. Olive. Or, and after 3 years of being an itinerant preacher in the Galilean sun, oh my gosh, dark brown. Now, he was apprenticed to his father, like all good members of a patriarchal culture ought to be. So what was his vocation? Carpenter. Yeah, he's a carpenter. Now, we're not exactly sure that teknon means woodworker. It could mean stoneworker. But either way, we're dealing with a blue-collar laborer. Yeah? Maybe he was a contractor and owned his own business. But what should this man's build look like in light of that vocation? What should his hands look like?
Rough.
Yeah. We need rough. We need muscular. We need a guy whose hands are calloused, perhaps scarred, maybe even a finger missing. And yet, we present our Jesus as a pale, skinny, white guy. Why is Jesus a pale, skinny, white guy in these images? Because the guys who painted him were pale, skinny, white guys. And so they put their faces on the image of Jesus. Is that wrong? No, I don't think it's wrong. In fact, I think God invites us to put our faces on the biblical images. I don't think that's a problem. We see ourselves in their story. But if we are going to become true students of the Bible, we're going to have to push past that a little bit. We're going to have to get past our ethnocentrism. We're going to have to see Jesus as the first century Jew he was, and all of the other characters are going to have to fall in line as well. Let me show you a few more ethnocentric presentations of Jesus and the disciples. This one is the wedding supper in Cana of Galilee. I love this one because if the disciples actually showed up in those outfits, they would have been laughed out of town. Take a look at this one. This one is coming from Bright Hope Baptist Church in Philadelphia. And what you're seeing is actually a stained glass window of an African American Jesus. And of course, the point is to put the face of the congregation on to the face of Jesus, but clearly ethnocentric. One of my new favorites comes from St. John's Episcopal in Memphis. Back in the 1950s, they had a famous painter come and do their wall murals, and their Jesus is a Viking. Yes, this comes from Jean-Henri de Rosen, and his Jesus is buff, he's blonde, and he's tall, and he's thin. This is anything but what you would expect from a first century Jew, but again, an ethnocentric presentation of a Jesus who isn't representative of his own culture, but certainly is representative of the faces that are looking at him. My new and most current favorite comes from the Cathedral of Cusco in Lima, Peru. You take a look at that image, you recognize the players, right? It's the Last Supper. All the right guys are sitting around the table. They're having the big feast of the Last Supper. So we should be looking at a great holiday, specifically the Jewish holiday of the Passover. Okay, that's all recognizable. But see, in Peru, they don't eat lamb for high holidays like the Jews would at the Passover. And of course, Jesus has got to have a very special meal, right? So I'd love to take guesses as to what the creature placed in the center of that table is.
Is it a pig?
It's not a pig, but that's a very close guess. He's small. He's got 4 legs. He's tasty.
Dog?
And if you come from Lima, Peru, this is what he is. He's a guinea pig. Yes, because this is a luxury item. Now you think about this, a first century Jew, right? A rabbi, right at Passover, eating a rodent. Yeah, not going to go. But this is ethnocentrism. So we're going to push past our guinea pigs. We're going to push past our ethnocentric presentations of Jesus, and we're going to dive into their culture, knowing that we're not going to canonize it, knowing that our goal is to understand it. And in understanding it, we're going to understand redemption's story all the better. Our goal, again, real people, real places, real faith. Now, as we take a look at the story of the biblical text, we are dealing with a very specific kind of culture. It is not our culture, it is a different one. Our culture would be described as bureaucratic. That's what we are. We are a state-based culture. It is the state that produces economic opportunity. It is the state that protects its citizens. It is the state that cares for the marginalized. So if you were to, God forbid, lose your job on Monday morning, the first thing you would do in our culture is you'd file for unemployment. If it got really bad, you might wind up down in the welfare office, looking at food stamps, looking at Medicaid, because we have a safety net in our bureaucratic culture provided by the state to care for the marginalized. If you went racing down the highway at 85 miles an hour in your brand new, shiny Volkswagen whatever, and you saw blue flashing lights behind your car, you would know that a representative of the state was confronting you for breaking the laws of the state, and he would stand at your window and he would ask you for certification that you belonged to the state, i.e. your driver's license and your insurance. And then, if he wasn't in a good mood, he would hand you a piece of paper that would show how you have to pay money to the state to be free of your penalty. This is a bureaucratic culture. Israel's culture was a tribal culture. A traditional culture is how Marshall Solins would describe it, which means that it's not the state that is the axis of the community, it is the family. Now, our families are important to us, and we sacrifice tremendously to care for them, but our families do not provide our economic opportunity, unless you're one of those few Americans who still is a part of a family business or a family farm. Your family also does not protect you legally. If you were to get in trouble at the court and the judge was a relative, he would have to recuse himself to make sure that he wasn't interrupting the legal process. But in Israel, it's the exact opposite. It is kinsmen who care for kinsmen. It is kinsmen who take care of discipline. If you were racing down, the national highway on your camel at 85 miles an hour, they would call your dad. And your dad would beat the snot out of you. This is what would happen. If your dad was not effective at beating the snot out of you, he'd call your uncles. And if your uncles couldn't get you to change your behavior, they would then call the elders of the clan, and these are real titles, elders, and they would bring you down to the city gate, and what I like to refer to as the youth pastor law in Deuteronomy. The reprobate son would be stoned to death because the community would discipline you. And what about the safety net? Well, in ancient Israel, in this tribal community, it is the family that provides the safety net. It is the family that is the unemployment, the welfare, the Medicaid, and the food stamps. And if the widow or the orphan, someone falling outside the family, finds themselves in need, it's the kinsman who steps up to the plate. If we were to look at this in diagram form, what you see is that the core of Israelite society is something called the Beit Av, something called the father's household. You can hear the family language in there, can't you? The father's household is not the standard household that you'd expect in the American suburbs. It's not a husband, a wife, and 2.5 kids and a dog in a 2,000 square foot home. This is not Israel. Rather, it would be anywhere from 15 to 30 people, an extended family, and this extended family would include the patriarch of the group, and Israel was a patriarchal tribal society, the oldest living male, his wife, his grown sons, their wives, and their children. This is the Beit Av, an extended family. Now, outside that circle, and that ever-progressive circle, you're going to wind up with something called the clan, or the lineage. And then outside that circle would be the tribe. Do you wonder why Israel is called the 12 tribes? Because there actually were 12 tribes. Like the American Indians, like the Sioux or the Cherokee. Yes, this is what Israel was. And then all the tribes gathered were the nation. This is Israel's society, and if you were to distill it down to 3 words, you would distill it down to the word patriarchal, patrilineal, and patrilocal. You can hear the word patra throughout because the oldest living male serves as the core of their society. This is how their society functioned. Are we canonizing it? No, but we need to understand it. So let's take a look at that first word, the word patriarchal. This has to do with authority, and the idea that the authority and therefore the responsibility within this extended family, this Beit Av, this father's household, belongs to the oldest living male. Ultimately, this oldest living male will make the decision as to who will live and sometimes who will die. If someone has to be sold into slavery or apprenticed off to the military in order to make sure that all the mouths under his roof was fed, the patriarch made that kind of decision. It was also his job to protect and defend all of his kinsmen. So if someone wound up falling on hard times, it was the patriarch who stepped up to the plate, put his resources on the line, and cared for his family. So we see that his immediate family was 15 to 30 people. This is the father's household. We see that the patriarch serves as the center of the household, both with responsibility and authority. And we see that ultimately the fate of the family rests on this man's shoulders. A story coming out of your Bible. The story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis chapter 38. I'm always challenging my students to preach this, and I can't get them to preach it. You'll see why as we move forward. Judah is one of the 12 patriarchs, right? So he's one of the 12 sheikhs of the tribes of Israel. He should be a holy man, right? Right? That would be our assumption. Well, he has a daughter-in-law named Tamar. She has been married to his eldest son, and his eldest son has died, leaving her a widow. This happens. So according to Israelite law, she must be cared for. And the way the law works is that Judah is supposed to offer this girl to his second son. The idea is that when she married, she moved into Judah's household. In order to keep her protected, to keep a roof over her head, she's going to take part in what's called the Levirate law. So the second son is going to marry her, keeping her in the household, And in keeping her in the household, he'll provide for her. He will give her a child, father a child with her, and that first child will belong to his dead brother. So that child will inherit his brother's goods. All the following children are supposed to belong to the living husband. This is the law in Israel. It's a little awkward for me, but it's the law in Israel. And this is what's supposed to happen with Tamar. Well, before I fill in the middle part of the story, Tamar, when we pick up her tale, is actually living in her biological father's house, which already shows us that Judah is messing up somehow. She should be in his house. But she's living with her biological father, and she's gotten herself pregnant. Well, you don't get pregnant in Israel randomly without some sort of repercussions. And the repercussions are that they drag her to the city gate, and the elders of her village are going to burn her. Now, before they actually light the match, they send a note to Judah, who's in a neighboring village, and says, "Shall we execute her?" And Judah says, "Yeah, go ahead and burn her." The point of the story is that Judah has the authority of life and death. This is patriarchal. Okay, what about the role of women in the society? Well, we've already bumped into it. A woman in a patriarchal society begins as the daughter of her father. She becomes the wife of her husband, and then she becomes the mother of her son. Throughout her experience, her link to the legal system, to the social safety net, and to the economy is going to be through the men in her life. Now, does this mean that she's without power? No. Don't be thinking that. These women were tough, and they knew how to get their men to do what they wanted to do. But with the legal system and the tribal system, her link is through her men. So if a woman winds up having married out of her father's household, without a husband, and without a son, what is her link to society? And the answer is she doesn't have one. This is why your Bible is constantly saying to you to care for the widow and the orphan, because these are people that fall outside the Beit Av, that have no provision. And if someone doesn't step in and take care of them, they will starve. So this is women in this society. This helps us a little bit with our Judah and Tamar story. Let's pick up another piece of data that will help us further. This is the concept of patrilinealism, which is the idea that all goods, all inheritance, move through the male line. This is how Israel tracks their inheritance. This is how they track their ancestry, through only the male line. Now, you already know this. You might not know you know this, but the reason you know it is because you've opened the Bible and you've seen that the genealogies are all male. Have you ever wondered about that? If you haven't, I can guarantee you that the second grade Sunday school class at your church, they've wondered about it. And they've raised their hands and they said, "Hey, teacher, where are all the girls?" Yeah. Well, it's not that the girls weren't there. It's that the girls are not tracked in the genealogy, because inheritance happens through the male line. The only time we should expect a woman in a genealogy is if a man had multiple wives, and therefore there's some question as to which wives' heirs are receiving the inheritance. So a king who has many wives, or possibly Abraham with Ishmael versus Isaac. But generally, if there's a woman in a genealogy, it's because the biblical writer has got something to say. And if you don't know this, you're going to miss what he's got to say. If you were to flip your Bibles open to Matthew chapter 1 and look at the greatest genealogy in the Bible, you would encounter the genealogy of Jesus the Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. He's the promised one. We've been waiting for thousands of years. At last he's come. And in the midst of his genealogy, there are 4 women. 4 women. What are they doing there? You and I both know they don't belong there. But if we look very closely at who's included, it's Ruth the Moabitess, the foreigner, despised according to the book of Deuteronomy. It's Rahab the harlot, the madam who ran her own brothel. It is Uriah's wife, unnamed. We know that she's Bathsheba, the most famous adulteress of all time. And it is Tamar, the audacious daughter-in-law that we're speaking of in our session today. What are they doing there? Guys, I would argue to you that the reason those women are in Jesus' genealogy is because the gospel writer is shouting at you that the ground is level at the foot of the cross. That not only will we accept the adulteress and the madam and the foreigner and the audacious one, not only will we let them into the community, we're actually going to let them into the genealogy of the Christ. And they stand right there on page 1 telling us what this new covenant and this new community is going to look like. Amen. All right, so what else do we have in our patrilineal stuff? The primary resource is going to be land and children, and so there are going to be laws in Israel that protect land and children. We've already bumped into them, the Levirate law. The idea that if indeed we wind up with a brother who marries but doesn't produce an heir, what do we do with his widow and what do we do with his inheritance? And the answer is that his brother steps in, takes his widowed wife as a second wife, produces an heir in his name, and the inheritance passes on to that heir. Well, what I didn't tell you about the story of Tamar is that when she was widowed, she was supposed to marry the second son, but according to the King James Version, when Judah gave her to his second son did not want to produce an heir in his brother's name. And so the second son spilled his seed upon the ground. It's times like this you're grateful for the King James Version? Yep. And therefore she didn't get pregnant, and she didn't bear an heir, and God looked at his crime and said, capital crime. God strikes him dead for this. Well, by the time we pick up the story, Tamar is supposed to have now married the third son. But Judah won't marry her to the third son because he says, there's something wrong with that girl. Every time I marry her to one of my boys, they drop dead. As opposed to maybe thinking that there's something wrong with one of his sons. It's an option. Okay, so what Tamar has done by the time we get here is she has said, okay, I'm never going to be given to this third son. I've been married. I'm no longer a virgin. I'm not going to get a chance to marry. My father-in-law is not taking care of me, and I have no heir. I got to do something. And this girl is a very enterprising young woman, so she dresses herself up, stands on the side of the road, and intercepts her father-in-law on a business trip, propositions him. He thinks she's a prostitute. They have sex. She gets pregnant. Tamar's got her heir. Yes, she does. The only problem is that nobody knows it was Judah, and she's going to die for her audacity. Well, just before they light the match in Genesis 38, she says, yes, do tell my father-in-law who has authority over me that I've played the harlot, but please send him this seal and this staff so he'll know who the man is who got me pregnant. Judah looks down at the seal and staff and he says, oh my goodness. And the line that comes out of your Bible is, she is more righteous than I. Okay, in my culture, no way. There is no daughter-in-law who gets to do this, and she is more righteous than I. But in Israel's culture, Tamar is more righteous than Judah. It's Judah who's the villain. If we don't see their story through their lens, we're going to miss that. All right, so this is patrilineal. There's also the fact that in Israel, land cannot be moved from one owner to another except through inheritance. There is no real estate business in ancient Israel. Yahweh gave the land to the patriarchs. The patriarchs gave it to the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes give it to their descendants. And the only way land passes from one man to the next is through inheritance. The only reason anyone would ever sell their land is if they were at the absolute brink of disaster. And even then, it is the responsibility of a kinsman to step up and buy their land back for them. And if that doesn't work, then in the year of Jubilee, every 50 years, the land returns to its original owner. And this is how Israel protects its society against perpetual poverty. Are we going to canonize this culture? No, but we're going to understand it. All right, that's patrilinealism. What about patrilocal? Well, patrilocal is also very interesting. The idea that the Beit Av, the father's household, is not just a descriptor for the family, it's actually a descriptor for the family compound. These people are not just an extended family, they actually live together in a single space. And in this single space, as diversified subsistence level agriculturalists, what they are doing is jointly farming the land they jointly own and sharing in its produce. The deal is, as all the biblical anthropologists would tell us, these folks are barely making it. And unless they share the labor and share the living space, they're not going to make it. Hence the extended family, and hence the family compound. This family compound would look very similar to this reconstruction. The idea that you would have an area set apart by some sort of protective wall. In the courtyard, you would have the women and the children doing domestic chores. In this image, you've got grain being ground into flour, the flour being turned into bread and baked in the tanur oven. You have a small garden for vegetables. You've got the children close at hand where they can be observed. Where are the men? They're out in the fields. They're keeping the crops going, they are taking care of the animals, and at the evening time, they will all come in to the family compound. They will share a joint meal. They will sleep in their 4-room pillared houses, which are the individual dwelling places that you see, and they'll start it all again the next morning. This is the father's house, the family compound. If we were to do a close-up on that 4-room pillared house, that individual area, you would see that this structure is designed for the immediate family. Now keep in mind, Israel doesn't even have a word for immediate family, but the conjugal couple is what the anthropologists would call it. And here they have 2 stories. The first story is set apart for domestic chores, for storage in the back room, and for some creatures that you see in the wings. On the second floor is where the family does most of their living. Here they sleep, they eat, they share their time, they roll out mats for sleeping, roll them back up, and spread a table for dinners. The roof, also living space, because the dry season is long in Israel, and we have many biblical stories of the upper room being used as a residence. What about that first floor? If you look very closely at this image, you'll see that in the wings are critters, donkeys, goats, lambs, any of these things. You see, the ancients actually kept their fragile livestock in the house on the first floor. And so Larry Steger, one of my teachers at Harvard, made the argument in a Basor article back in the 1980s that this is probably the setting of the Nativity. It is not a little wooden barn down the street. Rather, it's the first floor of the inn. And when Joseph pounds on the door and begs for shelter, the innkeeper says, the second floor is full. The roof is full. I don't have a square inch. But if you want to stay on the first floor, I know it's dirty, there are animals, but at least you'll be dry and safe, and my wife will be close by if there's trouble. The manger in which Jesus was laid, probably one of those stone troughs. I can reproduce them for you by the dozens in Megiddo if we ever wind up in Israel together. So this is the family compound. Now we ask the question, why should we care, right? Let's bring this one to a close. Why should you care about all of this cultural stuff out of Israel's past? And the answer is because although Israel's culture will evolve through urbanism and the monarchy and the exile and Hellenism, the images, the values that come with this system remain. So as we turn the page into our New Testament, right now you're looking at an image of the ultimate Father's house. In the New Testament, we're gathered in an upper room, right? All the guys are around the table. And there's not a guinea pig on the table, there's a lamb. And those 12 guys gathered around the table are hearing from their leader, who they've left everything for, that he is now leaving them. And they're in a panic. It's the Last Supper. Jesus, their rabbi, their revolutionary, the son of David who's supposed to make everything right, says, I'm leaving. And they fall apart, as I would too. And they start saying to him, but teacher, where are you going? Can we go with you? Teacher, don't leave us. And he turns to them and he says this in John chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. He says, do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house. Do you hear it? In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. Folks, at the moment of crisis, when Jesus has to come up with something, anything, that would comfort his beleaguered young men, he says to them, in my Father's house, in my Father's house, and I'm going to heaven to make a place for you. Guys, we've imposed our cultural lens on this passage, and what we've come up with is I've got a mansion up over the hillside in that bright land where I'll never grow old. Well, I'm here to break the news. You don't have a mansion up over the hillside, and I'm so sorry about that. Instead, what you've got is a space in your Heavenly Father's 4-room pillared house. What He has done is He has sent His eldest, the firstborn of His household, to seek and save the lost, so that He can reincorporate the exiled sons of Adam and daughters of Eve who have been lost to the great family, and to bring them safely home. Amen. Amen.
That house is going to look like. But I do know that there will be a place for me in that house. There'll be a place for Sue in that house. There'll be a place for our children in that house. And there will be a place for you in that house too. Wow. Take the idea of possessions and throw them out the window, would you please? That's what we're being set up for here. We're being set up to start to take a look at the cultures and the lands and what happened. But always keep in mind as we do that, it's going to be a lot different than we thought it was going to be. I know when I went off to seminary, I was a New Testament man. That's the only thing that matters. After all, that was the story of Jesus and his followers. When I got done, I was a God-fearing man. And I knew that the Old Testament had as much in it for me as the New Testament did. What do you think is going to be the most challenging aspect of this study? Just based on this little snippet of the beginning. What's going to be challenging you?
A different perspective.
Yeah.
Things are going to change in their importance. It's going to be, I think, because we just don't understand. And that's why we're here.
And I think a lot of the things that we believe and share and think is going to be there ain't even coming close. Now, if you want to come along for a ride in which we're going to tear down, but then build up, this is the place to be. She starts tearing down. But we got a lot of things yet to go. What do you hope will come out of these 12 weeks for you? Don't be bashful.
I hope to learn a lot of things that I did not know before.
It's just hard it is hard to realize what they are telling us. It is hard to realize.
Different culture.
And things change in importance when you learn.
If we find out that nobody's perfect.
Yes. Except me and thee.
God, look
That
at,
is
look at David and the things he did, yet he was God's child, you know, basically.
Yeah. Those of you that have visited other cultures, you know the truth that we're heading for, I think.
Yes.
You've seen things. You've seen things.
It definitely broadened your horizons. And I've been traveling for a long time because I like to see, you know, you don't have to go outside the country. You can go to California. They live differently than we do. You know, Miami, Alabama, which is where I'm from. A lot of people here from Indiana. It's totally different in Indiana than it's here. Different cultures. You know, and when you go to these places and you see these cultures, you have a lot more respect for people. All of a sudden, when you listen to the news means more to you because you've been there.
You think about the big cities, and there's the little China, and there's the German, and there's all these little communities within so many square miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're all different in their beliefs and their feelings.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, that's kind of like southern Idaho is all Latter-day Saints, all Mormons. And the Protestant churches they're small. You know, I mean, the LDS churches are large and they have several wards in one church, but it's a different culture because their belief is so different, basically, than our Protestant beliefs, because they believe in Joseph Smith. It's just, I mean, they believe in Jesus too, but they really believe in Joseph Smith and Brigham Young.
And that is a distinction that it's important to make right now. Because the issue is not what culture I'm from, what church I belong to, what kind of life that I lived or wanted to live. What is important is what it is that God says is important. How He wants us to live. What is so different about that from what we are seeing and living right now? And I think as you take a journey through the Old Testament, you're going to see these cultural clashes. And it's as culture clashes, the truth starts to get revealed. Because the truth transcends the culture. Culture is not the truth. The truth transcends the culture. So we are on the beginning steps of a very, very long journey. Get ready. You had a few things I would think shake up your beliefs already tonight. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, I want to know if the second son that was supposed to take Tamar, if he was married.
Didn't matter.
It didn't matter if he had more than one wife.
Exactly right. It did not matter.
It did not matter.
Nope.
Well, it certainly does in this day and age, doesn't it?
But how smart he was.
But the issue is not whether he was already married. The issue was he has to stand in for his brother. Okay. And while that gave her a place in society when she married him, it was a different place than his first wife.
Okay.
And if you listen carefully, her firstborn by him was considered his brother's son. So places it in a whole different context.
So what happens if they would have had a child, but it would have been a girl? Would the girl belong to the first?
No, it's a patriarchal culture, so it's a second chance.
Gotta be a male?
Gotta be a second chance.
So the girl would have belonged to the second husband.
Yeah.
Aha.
But what if she never produced a boy?
Too bad.
Okay.
Tough luck.
Okay.
I mean, it's that hard nose of a kind of a culture. I mean, good, bad, or
I mean,
indifferent.
it was just, that's the rules, it's how it was.
That's
There
the way it
no-
was.
Okay.
Yep.
So if she produced a son by that second, then it's his duty over?
Yeah. However, she now has a place within the family, in the Bedal.
Okay.
And so she has a right to live and be supported there in the Bedal.
In the house of the second son or in the father's house?
In the father's house, because that's where the second son lived.
Yes.
That's where the first son lived. Okay?
But the father's responsible for her,
As he is responsible for everybody in his household.
but I mean, in the sense that the second son has a umbrella responsibility for his wife and his children, and then daddy's up here, but then this wife over here who was married to the first son, even though he's not in the picture anymore, daddy up here is taking care of her and the son.
Yeah, and what you're going to have to push a little bit further with here is that, well, this is his kids, and this is this son's kids, and this is this son's kids. It's one family. And you will see this one over here reprimanding the kids from this one.
Oh.
Oh, okay. So we're one big happy family.
Sometimes not so happy, but it is one big family.
It's sort of like back in the 60s when everybody said you could sit on the porch and all the kids play in the yard. Back then, anybody on the street could reprimand you. And
Exactly.
If you got
Exactly.
If you got hungry, you can eat at anybody's.
Yes, exactly. You've got it nailed down at that point. Yeah, and I can tell you something. I've been reprimanded by some neighbors, and I hoped it didn't get back to my dad.
It would have been 10 times
Yeah, I
worse.
was just about to say the same thing. Growing up, I grew up with my grandmother, and I mean, everybody was my mother and my father. Grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, and if you go to church or you misbehave in church, just pray that your grandmother don't hear about it, because the church sister is going to give you a slap across the face, and then when you go home, you're going to get another beat.
Uh-huh.
Because everybody was responsible for you.
That's right.
And you had to pass everyone and say good morning and good evening.
And you don't get arrested like that woman did who hit her daughter with a box of cookies.
Yeah.
If you don't say hello, then you're rude, and you're definitely in trouble.
Yeah.
Because by the time you get home, my grandmother hears that I didn't say hello to somebody down the road, and I'm like, oh my God.
There's no child. There was no child abuse.
Yeah, you know.
But I have to admit that, things were a lot better.
Yeah, they
back
were.
then.
Yeah, they were.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were.
Don't try that today, because we did that at the campground. One boy was bullying his brother, and I walked up to his mother and I said, you need to have a talk with your son. He's beating your other son. She said, it's none of your business. Get out of my face.
You see, it wasn't that way before.
Exactly. But that poor child was crying, riding his bike around the campground. The other brother was beating him up, pushing him down. And you can't report it to a parent anymore. It's not your business.
You're afraid to now because somebody may take a gun out and shoot you.
Yep. Exactly.
And back in this day, it was just a given, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was just how it was.
That's the way it was.
And there was no question in it.
No. Oh,
I think too many people today I say too many, I've heard people try to make this culture we're talking about, oh, well, that was then. We don't do it that way now. And so we don't need to pay attention to it. Basically, is I think my take on what they were saying. If this were done now, all this stuff. I think too many people do try to put it in today's text, and it doesn't work.
Doesn't work. No, does not. Does not.
It was a different time. When we grew up, it was a different time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is now.
Yep. Yep.
But if you grew up in a home like I did, where the two parents actually loved each other and were each other's best friend, I had a good childhood. It was an easy childhood, as long as I did what they said.
Your feet under my table, it's my rules.
Yep,
Yep.
absolutely.
There you go.
Yep.
There you go.
Here's dinner, eat.
What do you mean you
You
know
gotta
what?
try a little bit of everything.
there
Don't
you
have
go.
to take it, eat it all, but
You
try
have
a
to
little
taste
bit.
it.
Yep.
Well, folks, we will continue this journey next week, and it's going to get more and more interesting. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's pray, shall we? Father, thank you for this wonderful, wonderful teacher that you have brought us through the vision of television and recorded sound. God, may this be a beginning for each of us to learn not only more about your people, but more about your expectations and desire for our lives. In your Son's name, Father. Amen.
If
Go
I
in
may,
peace.